Hey, Dollars and Change fans, it's Pete Krull here. And this next episode of Dollars and Change, we're going to turn the tables a little bit. So I was out in Kansas City for Prime Week, which is Prime Capital Financial's annual conference. And I sat down with Terra McBride, our Chief Marketing Officer, and she actually interviewed me. We talked a little bit about the evolution of SRI, sustainable, resilient, and innovation investing, what I've written about and what I've been talking about for the past several months after Hurricane Helene. So enjoy the episode, and thanks for watching Dollars and Change.
Hi, I'm Terra McBride. I'm here with Pete Krull. Before we get into a brief interview with Pete about SRI, I want to make sure that you know we have a free resource available to you. Scan the QR code on the screen to access an SRI ebook that we've written just for you that gives you some information about the 101 around SRI, how to start taking steps towards aligning your investments with your values, and how to get in touch with the Earth Equity team. If you have any questions, just reach out. So let's get right into it. You've been in the business for over 20 years, 2 lovely decades.
Makes me feel old.
You and me both, man. Talk a little bit about the history of SRI and maybe even define what SRI is.
So SRI, and that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about this whole time here is the definition of it. But when I started in this business 20 years ago, almost 21 now, SRI stood for socially responsible investing. And it has a very, very long history going back to religious folks who didn't want to own alcohol or gambling or
like a long time ago, right?
Like the 18th century.
Right.
Yeah. So it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while. And it's taken a bunch of iterations over the years. We can take a look during the 70s and 80s during the apartheid regime down in South Africa. And investors didn't want to have a part of that. And so they started a divestment campaign to move their money out of the country. Ultimately, it wasn't necessarily what changed it, but it definitely had a major impact on moving that regime out of South Africa. Continue forward, say, into the 70s. The Green Revolution, Earth Day started, and people wanted to invest in a way that was in alignment with what their values were. They wanted to invest green. And so, these things just slowly sort of came together. And traditionally, what socially responsible investing was 3 parts. It was screening, so you screened in the kind of companies you wanted, and you screened out the companies you didn't want. It was shareholder advocacy, so using your shares, your proxy votes to actually have an impact on companies. And community investing, making sure some of that money went back into communities to have a positive impact. And so that's sort of the history of it. There's a time, and I don't have the exact date on this, but the UN had a report that really came out with what ESG, or environmental, social, and governance investing is. And that really took off because people wanted to be able to quantify what they were doing. They didn't necessarily want to sort of guess. And so that happened for a while. It also got a lot of negativity from a political perspective as well. And that's what we're still sort of dealing with right now.
Well, it does feel like, so I'm from Pittsburgh. Rachel Carson is a Pittsburgh icon, and she's also an environmental icon.
Right.
And this is not a new conversation. I mean, as you've mentioned, the 70s was really when we saw this kind of surgence of environmentalism. But it does feel like we're talking about it more now than ever.
Right.
And so, I think that kind of comes into this area of where you've talked about changed climate. Why do you call it changed climate versus climate change?
Because I live in Asheville and we had a hurricane hit us just last year. We're seeing fires out in California, and pretty much globally there is changes happening because the climate has changed. And so when we call it climate change, in a way, it sort of tells us that it's in the future.
Yeah, it feels distant.
It feels distant, and it's really easy to kick the can down the road. And maybe not be a little bit more efficient, maybe not make the changes that we need to change. But if we call it the changed climate, it's here now. It's happening now, and it creates a little bit more urgency. The problem is, what scientists are, they hedge. And so because they don't have absolute answers, they can't say, well, on this date, this is going to happen. And so the language that they use isn't as drastic as they probably should be using.
Yeah.
They also don't want to be called alarmists either. And so
Right.
I think that's maybe in a way done a little bit of a disservice, but we are where we are right now, and we live in a changed climate. And we still have time to make changes to mitigate or to reduce the impact, but we need to start planning for the changes that are here now.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Asheville, North Carolina, and the Hurricane Helene from last year. So with that experience, how has that changed the way that you look at sustainable investing, if at all?
One of the things that we really noticed going through it was that there was a tremendous sort of aspect of resilience and adaptation that traditionally hasn't necessarily been part of sustainable investing. And so when I look at where we need to be in a changed climate environment, we need to be more resilient. We need to know that these storms are going to hit. They're going to hit with more intensity. They're going to hit with more frequency.
And we are seeing that. That is real time happening year after year.
Yeah. We were warned about it. We've been warned about it for the past 5 decades.
From scientists who were trying not to be alarmists.
Exactly. Just listen to us. We're holding your hand, trying to walk you down the road here. Mm-hmm. But legacy industries are really hard to overcome. Mm-hmm. They have got embedded interests, and it's very hard to really get them to change. What do we always say? Change is the only is the only constant, right?
Yeah.
Well, but we want to keep things as they are for as long as we can, so we can make as much profit off of them for as long as we can. Mm-hmm. But there's opportunity here, and there's lots of opportunity, and so. The resilience side, the adaptation side, I think is a really nice counter, if you will, to the sustainability side, which is about reducing impact, reducing emissions, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. How are you defining what we're calling the evolution of SRI? You kind of touched on this a bit, but if you can get
Absolutely.
into that.
And this is really where we're going to be trying to make a push, if you will, within the investing space. Again, sustainable investing, SRI, socially responsible investing, sustainable and responsible investing. And the next iteration that we see is sustainable, resilient, and innovation investing. And the reason I've talked for a second about sustainability, I've talked a little bit about resilience, and innovation is really what ties it all together. I mean, it's what really defines this generation. When you look at what you have in your hand, for example, a phone. It's not just a phone, it's a computer, it's a camera. It is pretty much everything. I grew up with one of those phones that you had to, use the little dial thing on.
It's so fun to watch people who've never seen a rotary phone figure out how to dial a number.
How do we do this?
Yeah, they have no clue that they have to go all the way around. It's hilarious. It's great.
And when we think about the arc that took us from that analog phone to these unbelievable supercomputers that we hold in our hands, in my presentations, I'll show a picture of somebody bloodletting, a doctor doing bloodletting, and then I'll show another picture of an MRI machine. And again, the distance between those two is not really all that many years, but it's light years in terms of innovation. And we need to be able to harness innovation to help us become more sustainable, but also more resilient. And so that's where we're really going to be pushing our marketing and the way that we talk about sustainable investing, because I think it makes the most sense where we are right now.
Yeah. Kind of continuing on that thought, where do you see SRI going into the future?
Mm-hmm. The Europeans like to say that sustainable investing is just simply investing.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think about the due diligence that goes into picking companies that are more sustainable, more resilient, more innovative, that's what we should be doing anyways. ESG brings us a tool to help us gauge what the environmental, social, and governance risks are on a company. And when we think about how we judge and how we choose company A over company B, we're looking at their opportunity for growth, but we're also looking on the negative. We're looking at how can we minimize risks? There's a misconception out there in the marketplace that ESG is about the impact the company has on the world around it. That's not true. ESG is about the impact of the world on the company. What are the environmental risks on the company? What are the social risks on the company? What are the governance risks on the company? And how can we minimize those risks so that way we have a higher return, lower risk portfolio?
So Pete, let's dig a little bit more into the idea of resilience. Can you
Right.
talk about that?
Absolutely, because resilience is an aspect of sustainable investing that most people haven't looked at pretty much ever. But in this changed climate world, resilience directly relates to infrastructure and infrastructure investments. And that's an area, again, that we really haven't looked at for as long as SRI has been around.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. So when Hurricane Helene hit Asheville, Interstate 40 that goes between Asheville and Knoxville pretty much was washed away. That's an infrastructure thing that we're going to continue to deal with as the climate continues to change, as we see these more impactful and more intense storms come through. In Miami, for example, every time there's a king tide, the city floods.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up through the storm sewers. That's something we're going to have to deal with. Infrastructure is a big opportunity from the construction side to things like, there's a lot of windmills that are out in the Midwest where there's not a big population. So we have to make sure that electricity is transmitted to where the population centers are. That's infrastructure as well. And so we look at, again, not just the sustainability side being important, but this resilience and infrastructure side. Another example in Asheville during the hurricane, and again, I'm using this as an example because it's a real world, real lived example. Our communication systems went down. So we didn't have any internet, we didn't have cell coverage, and that was all a factor in the systems not being hardened, not being prepared for events like this. We lost our water system for 2 months, even though they had built a pipe something on the order of 20 or 30 feet underground, it still got washed away.
Oh, wow.
So it's these kinds of infrastructure investments that we're going to continue to make. We're going to have to continue to make them, not necessarily for the last storm, but for the intensity of the next storm.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's so much nuance to this, and I think that there are probably, just even hearing you talk, people who are listening to this probably have more questions.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
So how do they get those questions answered? What can you do to help people who want to learn more?
Absolutely. So earthequity.com is our website. Reach out to us. We love to talk about what we do, how we do it, how we help folks align their investments with their values, which is ultimately what we like to say we do. We love to have talks for people. We've been invited, multiple times to talk to people, things like the Sierra Club or organizations that want to learn more about this. So, go to the website, reach out to us, and we can answer your questions and hopefully help you invest with your values.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Pete. Really great information. I think anybody who's interested in learning more about SRI, the ways to get, even just taking steps into this space to understand it more and maybe even start to shift your investments, these are the guys to talk to, guys and gals to talk to. They know their stuff. They've been doing this for a long time. They eat, sleep, breathe SRI. So if you are interested in learning more, get in touch with Pete and his team. We also have some resources that are available for you. Feel free to scan the QR code that is on your screen and access our SRI ebook. That'll give you some 101 on that and also some additional ways to get in touch with the team. Thank you again, Pete, for your time and explaining this all to us. It's been really great.
Thank you, Tara. I appreciate it.